My name is Jake Morrison, and this happened in the fall of 2022. At the time, I was 29 years old and working seasonal maintenance jobs around the Pacific Northwest. Money was getting tight after summer ended, and I was taking almost anything that paid well. One afternoon, I found an online listing that sounded almost too easy. A private research company needed someone to stay alone on a small island off the coast of Alaska for 2 weeks. The job was simple: keep the backup generators running, check the weather equipment twice a day, and report any damage after storms. The pay was almost $4,000. The island wasn't open to tourists, and the old research station had been closed for years. According to the company, they still owned the land and occasionally needed someone to watch over the buildings until a new project started. I figured 2 weeks of boredom was worth the money. 3 days later, I was standing on a small dock in a fishing town waiting for a boat. The captain introduced himself as Mike. He looked around 60 and barely spoke during the ride. About halfway there, he finally asked me one question. "You staying the whole 14 days?" "That's the plan," he nodded slowly. "If you change your mind, call before sunset. I don't come out after dark." I laughed a little. He didn't. The island appeared through thick gray fog about 20 minutes later. It wasn't very big. Mostly cliffs, pine trees, and one abandoned research station sitting near the shoreline. There was also an old lighthouse about half a mile away, but the company told me it hadn't been used in decades. Mike unloaded my supplies. Before leaving, he handed me a satellite phone. "Cell service dies out here." "I've got it." He looked toward the lighthouse for a second before climbing back into his boat. Then he said something that stuck with me. "If you hear someone knocking after midnight, don't answer." I assumed he was trying to scare the new guy. He started the engine and disappeared into the fog. Suddenly, the island was completely silent. No cars, no people, just wind and waves crashing against the rocks. The station itself wasn't bad, old but clean. It had electricity from solar panels backed up by diesel generators. There were security cameras covering the outside, although only 4 of the 8 still worked. Inside, I unpacked my food and checked everything on the maintenance list. Nothing unusual happened the first day. That evening, I walked down to the beach to watch the sunset. That's when I noticed something strange. There were footprints. Fresh ones, leading from the water toward the trees. At first, I thought they belonged to Mike, but the boat had docked on the opposite side of the island. These prints came from somewhere else. They were barefoot. Who walks barefoot across freezing rocks in Alaska? I followed them for about 30 yards before they disappeared into thick brush. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing answered. After standing there for another minute, I convinced myself they were old tracks exposed by the tide. It wasn't worth thinking about. That night I cooked dinner, watched a downloaded movie, and went to bed around 11. At exactly 12:17, knock, knock, knock. 3 slow knocks hit the front door. I froze. Mike's warning immediately came back into my head. I looked through the small window beside the door. Nobody. I grabbed a flashlight and checked every security camera. Nothing. The motion sensors never activated. Maybe a loose branch had hit the building. That's what I kept telling myself. The next morning, everything looked normal. No footprints, no damage, no sign that anyone had been there. I finished my inspection route and almost forgot about it. Around lunchtime, the satellite phone rang. It was the company's supervisor. "Everything okay?" "So far, You settling in? Yeah. Before hanging up, I casually mentioned the knocking. There was a long pause. Then he laughed. Old buildings make strange noises. Something about the way he answered felt rehearsed. Still, there wasn't much else to think about. The second night was completely quiet. No knocks, no strange sounds. I started feeling embarrassed that I'd let myself get nervous. By the third day, I had fallen into a routine. Morning inspection, generator check, weather report, dinner, sleep. Late that afternoon, I decided to hike toward the abandoned lighthouse. It sat on the highest point of the island, overlooking the ocean. The door was chained shut. Most of the windows had been boarded over, but one board immediately caught my attention. It had fresh scratch marks, not weather damage, recent, like someone had tried pulling it loose. As I looked closer, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around immediately. Nobody, just trees moving in the wind. Then I heard another sound, branches snapping farther uphill. I shouted, "Who's there?" Silence. I waited another 30 seconds before walking back toward the station. Halfway down the trail, I had the strange feeling someone was following me. Every time I stopped, the footsteps stopped too. I finally reached the station without seeing anyone. That night, I locked every door. Around 11:40. One of the security cameras suddenly went offline. Then another, then another. Only the camera facing the generator shed still worked. I restarted the system. Nothing came back. 5 minutes later, movement appeared on the last camera. Someone walked across the edge of the frame, too far away to see clearly. They were carrying a flashlight. I ran outside. The light disappeared into the trees. I searched for nearly 15 minutes. Nothing. No voices. No footprints. No light. When I returned, the front door of the station was standing wide open. I knew I had locked it. Every cabinet inside had been opened, but nothing was stolen. My food, my wallet, my laptop, everything was still there. Only one thing had changed. A wet pair of bare footprints crossed the floor and stopped directly beside my bed. I stood there staring at those footprints for what felt like a full minute. They were still wet. Whoever made them had been inside only seconds earlier. I grabbed the flashlight from the table and checked every room again. Bathroom, storage room, kitchen, generator room, nothing. There was nowhere inside the station for someone to hide. The only way out was the same front door I'd just walked through. I stepped outside. The wind had picked up, and the fog was rolling in from the water. My flashlight barely reached 20 feet ahead. I called out, "If you're out here, this isn't funny." The only thing I heard was the ocean crashing against the rocks. I locked the station again and pushed a heavy filing cabinet against the front door before trying to get some sleep. I don't think I slept more than an hour. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach drop. The filing cabinet was still against the door, still exactly where I'd left it. But the footprints were gone. The floor was completely dry, like they had never been there. I checked the security system. The recordings from the previous night had been erased, not corrupted, deleted. Every camera stopped recording at exactly 11:43 p.m. Then they all started working again at 2:11 a.m. More than 2 hours were missing. I immediately called the company. No answer. I tried again, straight to voicemail. Then I called Mike, the boat captain. He answered after 2 rings. "Everything all right?" "I don't think so." I told him about the cameras, the footprints, the open door. He stayed quiet for several seconds. Finally, he asked, "Did you go near the lighthouse yesterday?" Yeah, another long silence. I told them to lock that place up years ago. What do you mean? You should leave. I can't. Nobody's answering. I said leave. The company's boat isn't coming for another 11 days. You've got the satellite phone. Call the Coast Guard if you have to. Before I could ask anything else, he hung up. That was the first time I seriously considered leaving. But calling the Coast Guard over footprints felt ridiculous. What was I supposed to tell them? Someone might be hiding on the island? They'd probably think I was overreacting. So I stayed. Around noon, I started walking the shoreline. If someone was really living on the island, they had to be getting food somehow. About half a mile north of the station, I found an old wooden dock hidden behind a line of rocks. It wasn't on the map the company gave me. Most of it had collapsed into the water, but one section looked newer. Someone had replaced a few boards recently. Then I noticed something tied underneath, a small aluminum rowboat. It wasn't abandoned. There was fresh fuel inside, a dry backpack, fishing gear, 2 bottles of drinking water. Someone was using it. I backed away without touching anything. As I turned to leave, I heard voices, not loud, just enough to know there were at least 2 people somewhere in the trees above me. I couldn't make out the words, only short sentences, then complete silence. I ran back toward the station without looking behind me. The rest of the afternoon, I stayed inside. Around 6 that evening, another call came through on the satellite phone. The screen showed unknown number. I answered. No one spoke. All I heard was breathing, slow, calm, like someone was standing with the phone right next to their face. Hello? Nothing. Who is this? The breathing continued for another 15 seconds. Then the line disconnected. I checked the call log. There was no record of the call. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in the control room, watching the one security monitor that still worked. Midnight came. Nothing. 12:30. Still nothing. At 1:08 a.m., the motion alarm suddenly beeped. Not near the front door, not near the windows, near the generator shed. I switched to that camera. Someone was standing beside the fuel tank. They were wearing a dark rain jacket with the hood pulled over their head. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching the camera. I picked up the spotlight and aimed it through the window. The person slowly lifted one arm, then pointed toward the lighthouse. A second later, they walked into the trees. I waited 5 minutes before going outside. The generator was still running. Nothing had been damaged. But on the fuel tank, someone had written one word with a black marker. But I didn't wait until morning. I packed my backpack, grabbed the satellite phone, and started walking toward the old dock where I'd found the rowboat. If I could get that boat running, I didn't care where it took me. Anything was better than staying on that island. The fog was so thick, I could barely see the trail. About 10 minutes into the hike, I heard footsteps behind me. Not one person, several. Slow, matching my pace. Every time I stopped, they stopped too. I switched off my flashlight and stepped behind a large pine tree. The footsteps kept coming, closer, closer. Then I saw them. 3 figures walked past me without saying a word. All of them wore dark rain jackets. All of them carried flashlights pointed at the ground. I couldn't see a single face. They continued toward the research station. None of them looked in my direction. I waited until they disappeared into the fog before moving again. When I finally reached the hidden dock, the rowboat was gone. Only the rope was left, still tied to the post. That's when I heard the sound that convinced me I wasn't dealing with one person anymore. Behind me, somewhere in the darkness. A whistle echoed through the trees. A second later, another whistle answered from farther up the island, then another. They weren't random, they were signaling each other, and from the way the sound spread across the island, I realized they were surrounding me. The whistle stopped. For a few seconds, the island was completely silent again. I stayed frozen behind a fallen tree, barely breathing. Whoever those people were, they knew the island better than I did. If I kept running through the woods, they'd find me. I backed away from the dock as quietly as I could and started moving along the rocky shoreline instead. The tide was low enough that I could stay below the tree line. It was slow going. The rocks were slippery, and every few minutes I had to stop to listen. Twice I saw flashlight beams moving through the trees above me. They weren't searching randomly. They were sweeping the shoreline. I made it back to the research station just before 3 in the morning. The front door was open again. This time, I didn't go inside. I slipped around the back of the building and climbed the metal ladder that led to the roof. From there, I could see almost the entire clearing. About 5 minutes later, 3 people walked out of the woods. The same dark rain jackets, the same hoods. One of them shined a flashlight into the station. Another checked the generator. The third simply stood there watching the tree line. Then a fourth person joined them. He wasn't wearing a hood. Even from that distance, I could tell he was older than the others. He pointed toward the lighthouse and spoke for a few seconds. The others nodded. Then they all disappeared into the darkness again. I waited another 20 minutes before climbing down. The station was a mess. Cabinets were open. My backpack had been dumped onto the floor. They hadn't stolen anything. They were looking for something. That's when I noticed a folded piece of paper sitting on the kitchen table. It hadn't been there before. It only had one sentence written on it. "We told you to leave." No signature, no explanation. I picked up the satellite phone, no signal. The battery still showed 80%, but it couldn't connect. I tried over and over, nothing. Then I remembered the emergency radio inside the old lighthouse. The company had mentioned it during training, saying it probably didn't work anymore. At that point, probably was good enough. As the sky started getting lighter, I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the lighthouse. The wind had picked up overnight, and light rain was starting to fall. The trail felt different during daylight. I noticed footprints everywhere, not just one set, at least 6 different sets. Some boot prints, some barefoot. They all led toward the lighthouse. When I reached the entrance, the heavy chain that had been wrapped around the door 2 days earlier was lying on the ground. The lock had been cut. Someone had been inside recently. I stepped into the lighthouse. The smell hit me immediately. Diesel fuel, wet clothes, cigarette smoke. It wasn't abandoned, it was being used. Sleeping bags covered the floor. There were canned food stacked against one wall. Fishing nets, water containers, battery-powered lanterns. Someone had been living there for months, maybe longer. Then I heard voices upstairs. Without thinking, I backed out of the building and started running. Someone shouted, "He's outside!" Seconds later, footsteps pounded down the metal stairs. I sprinted toward the station, but I already knew they were faster. Branches snapped behind me. One voice yelled, "Cut him off!" I changed direction and ran toward the cliffs overlooking the water. There was nowhere else to go. When I reached the edge, I looked down. The rocks below were maybe 30 feet down. Dangerous, but survivable. Behind me, the footsteps were getting closer. I made the decision without thinking. I jumped. I landed hard on the wet rocks below. The impact knocked the air out of me. Pain shot through my left ankle. I could barely stand. Above me, I heard shouting, but nobody jumped after me. Instead, they disappeared from the edge. I limped along the shoreline for nearly half an hour before I found a narrow crack between two cliffs where I could hide. I stayed there until late afternoon. No voices, no whistles, nothing. Finally, I turned the satellite phone on one last time. This time, it connected. I don't know why. Maybe the weather had changed. Maybe I was finally in a better position. I didn't care. I immediately called the Coast Guard. The operator kept me talking while they traced the signal. About an hour later, I heard the sound of a helicopter. I climbed out from the rocks and started waving both arms. The rescue crew spotted me almost immediately. As they pulled me aboard, I looked back at the island. I expected to see people running, flashlights, something. There was nothing, just trees, fog, and the old lighthouse. The Coast Guard took me back to the mainland, where state troopers interviewed me for nearly 4 hours. The next morning, officers returned to the island with a search team. They found the hidden dock. They found the rowboat. They found the supplies inside the lighthouse. But they didn't find a single person. It was as if everyone had disappeared overnight. The investigators believed the group had been using the island as a temporary base for illegal smuggling between fishing vessels operating offshore. The abandoned research station gave them a place to monitor anyone who arrived unexpectedly. Instead of killing people, they scared them into leaving before anyone discovered what they were doing. That explanation made sense, mostly. A few weeks later, one of the detectives called me. The search team had recovered the hard drive from the station's security system. Most of the deleted footage was gone forever, but one damaged video file had been restored. It showed 3 people entering the station the night my door was opened. They searched every room exactly the way I remembered. Then all 3 suddenly stopped moving. They turned toward the hallway at the same time, like they had heard something. A few seconds later, every one of them ran out the front door as fast as they could. The hallway camera never showed what scared them. There was no person, no animal, nothing at all. The detective told me they watched the footage over and over, hoping they had missed something. They never found an answer. I still think about that island sometimes, not because of the people chasing me, not because of the whistles in the woods, but because whatever made those men panic was already inside the station with me, and whatever they saw, the camera never did.